Okay, good afternoon. So it's 1:30. It's time for the Tech Talk show this afternoon with me, Kazeem. And today I'm not on the show alone as well. Yes, I've got Fumi and Chocolate anchoring the show. And, I have a guest who is also not new on the show with me today. Adnan, hi.
Hi, Kazeem. Great to be back on the show.
Yes, yes. So again, it's the Tech Talk Wednesday, and today on the show we're going to be talking security, and the topic today is Defender for Endpoint Security. So that's what myself and Adnan will be walking you through today. Adnan, I mentioned that you're not new on the show, but it will be best still we start with an introduction, just for those listening in and hearing you for the first time, Adnan.
Yes, Kazeem. I'm a IT consultant working for a Dutch company called Next in the Netherlands, and I basically provide services to either protect companies using Microsoft security products or anything that touches or works with the Microsoft Cloud, because I am the Azure guy and the Microsoft technical lead. So that's basically my focus.
Yeah, thank you for that short introduction. So, we're talking Defender for Endpoint Security. So, let's start with introducing endpoint security. So Adnan, what is Defender for Endpoint Security?
Well, first we got to look at the IT landscape. If you look a couple of years back, the network perimeter of the company used to basically be the security perimeter. But nowadays, everybody's using different devices. It's either a laptop, a mobile phone, or a tablet. And that's really where the work gets done. So the endpoints, and by the nature of our work, people are working everywhere. They're not just working at a company. So we need to secure those devices. And Defender for Endpoint is a security, much more than just a security software. It's a whole cloud-based service security platform that ties into the built-in Defender client that's built into Windows that can protect and detect and investigate and respond to all these different advanced threats that's out there.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the Windows that is built into Windows, but a lot of people using Microsoft Windows PCs should be used to the Windows firewall, right? So how is the Defender for Endpoint Security different from the built-in Windows firewall that everyone is used to?
Well, it's much more than that. Like I said, it's allows the Defender agent to tie into the security cloud service to do much more than just configuring and preventing firewalls. Because remember, people are quite often being approached through email with phishing and those sort of things. So it's not where over the network somebody's trying to contact your computer immediately. It can, but there's a lot of different kinds of attack vectors that use different techniques, and the Defender for Endpoint can protect you against all those different sophisticated attacks because it uses advanced methods to leverage the security. So there's a lot of different ways. We'll look at the different features and the core uses, but it goes a lot further than, just antivirus and malware protection and configuring the firewall.
Oh, okay, okay. So I'm sure there are a number of moving parts to the Defender for Endpoint. So do you mind? I know towards the tail end of the program, you would want to show us something. But before that time, do you mind walking us through a few of the moving parts that makes up the Defender for Endpoint?
Well, it consists of a cloud service. So that's basically the whole security management part of the software. And it utilizes the Defender built into Windows as the agent. So normally within Windows, you have Windows Defender. And that basically does a lot of anti-malware, antivirus scanning. But if you tie that into the Defender for Endpoint service, it really turns into a much more sophisticated piece of security. So that's what the two main parts. And then what happens is quite often in a company, your endpoint or computer is managed by either Into or Endpoint Manager or some other MDM or configuration manager management software. So with this being a Microsoft product, this ties into the endpoint manager service and software that can manage the Windows 10 device. So because it's sort of Microsoft works better with Microsoft, you could say, it just coexists much better and it can lean on one another. So the management is done through like Endpoint Manager, and the security service is done through the endpoint protection.
Oh, okay.
Defender for Endpoint service.
Okay. Okay. You know, Adnan, there's this popular saying that we really shouldn't try to run multiple antivirus on a single system. Yeah. So if we do have, it's best practice to leave our Windows firewall turned on. So what would you advise, trying to have the Windows firewall turned on, and for people leveraging the cloud, they are also using the endpoints and maybe some other third-party antivirus solution, let's call it Kaspersky. What would your recommendation be?
Well, my recommendation is always to try and use Defender as your anti-malware and antivirus. But there is a way you can coexist. If some companies have already invested in like a third-party antivirus, anti-malware protection agent on the endpoints. But the endpoint Defender for Endpoint service can still utilize the Defender, Microsoft Defender on the endpoints for the endpoint defense or extended detection and response. So we can leave the antivirus and anti-malware scanning to the third-party vendor and utilize the advanced threat protection with the service. But my advice would be to use only one, and that would be Defender.
That would be Defender. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
There is a go-to place to manage and administer many of these cloud-related Microsoft security services, right? So one very popular one is the Security Center, right? So the Security Center portal, when you access the Security Center portal, there are many security-related services, Adnan. How do you figure, which to use? And specifically now, where does the Defender for Endpoint Security fit? How do you know, oh, this time
Yeah.
I think this is the right fit for me?
Well, there's no one size fits all, but what I can say is you got to look at security or defense in depth. And by that, I mean, there's a lot of different moving parts within an organization. So you need to look at first defending the identity, because we have to do with access and authorization and authentication. So we have to always make sure that we use something like Defender for Identity, because Microsoft has a whole Defender suite to cater for all the different levels. And we're also using Office 365 or Microsoft 365, where we have SharePoint, OneDrive. We've got data in the cloud, obviously. So we have Defender for Office that takes care of securing that environment. Defender for Endpoint really exists at the level of the device itself. And the device could be any device. It doesn't have to be Windows. It could be Linux, Mac OS X. It could also be mobile devices. So to really cover a whole sector of different kind of endpoints, It really protects all those different views. And then obviously people have investments in Azure where they can use Defender for Azure to protect their infrastructure as a service and all the different services running in the cloud. So you always got to look at all those different levels to make sure that you protected 100%. Because as we know, if you're just covering the endpoint, you're not fully there. And if you're just covering the identities, you're leaving a whole sector that's unsecure. So you have to look at your security in depth and cover all the bases.
Okay, okay. So what you're saying, Adnan, it's always going with the onion approach when it comes to security, right?
Yeah,
Layer after layer
we
of security.
we onions, Kazeem. It's a layered approach.
Okay. This is a radio, a university radio station, LASU radio we're on, and so there are quite a number of students listening in right now. So some of them perhaps might be wondering, oh, okay, layered approach. Now I've learned about Defender for endpoints. So maybe it's something I can turn on. So I want to check. Is there a price to this? Does it come free of charge, or is there something they will have to pay to use the Defender for endpoint? And are there dependencies for using the Defender for endpoint?
Well, if you just want to get started, you can always sign up for a trial. There's a lot of opportunities for people that want to learn about it, and also people that are trying to implement it to try it out in a trial basis first before they invest in it. You really need either EMS license, or it comes with the Microsoft E5, Microsoft 365 E5 licenses. So there's a number of ways you can get it if in a license form. But if you just want to get started, you could sign up a trial.
Okay, okay. And did you say there are dependencies, that there are things we need to have to use it, or we can, once we have the trial or we have the paid version of it, can we just roll with it without having to worry about any dependencies?
Well, the only dependency you require is a endpoint. Like for example, Windows machines, and depending on how you want to manage it, I can recommend that the best management for Defender for endpoint is Endpoint Manager, previously known as Intune, to manage the devices. And the reason being is that with Endpoint Manager, you get tamper protection. So quite often when it comes to security and you're protecting the endpoints, what a hacker does is the first thing he does is try and disable the security that's already running on there. So with Endpoint Manager, it prevents anything else from changing the security service running on the endpoint because it's enforced.
Okay.
If you're using Endpoint Manager.
Okay. I also want to check, are we able to use the Defender for Endpoint to manage other cloud platforms or other operating systems? People sometimes like to run, that's the techie people now, would like to run multiple OSs on their systems, as virtual machines. Or people using the cloud already might have some VMs in the cloud that are not Microsoft VMs. So is there a possibility of using the Defender for Endpoint to manage other cloud platforms and other OSs?
Of course, Linux, Windows Server, Mac OS X, and even mobile platforms like Android, iOS can be managed or protected with the Defender suites. And it really doesn't matter which cloud platform you're running your infrastructure on. As long as the operating system is supported by Defender, and if people go to the documentation, they can see a whole list of what's available.
Okay, okay. So we'll need to take a short break just about now, and we'll be back in just a little bit. All right, so it's still a Tech Talk Wednesday with Kazeem. So, and I still have Adnan with me on the show. And remember, today's topic is Defender for Endpoint Security. So that's what we're talking on today's episode of the show. So, Adnan, it's time for a demo. Keep in mind, we're doing this on the radio station, so it would be nice. So, if you can walk us through such that the people online can, get to see what you're doing, and at the same time, we're carrying people listening along at the same time.
Sure.
Yeah. So, do you have something to show us to help us appreciate the Defender for Endpoint better?
Yes, what I can do is I can give people a walkthrough on
Okay.
the Defender for Endpoint portal. So
Okay.
hopefully some of the people that were watching the video later will be able to see the screen, but Microsoft has recently kind of consolidated the separate Defender for Endpoint portal with the new unified experience that gives you all the Microsoft 365 Defender security products in one admin center. So right now before me, I have the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. That's usually the place where you can go and set up or view any devices that you have enrolled or onboarded into the Defender for Endpoint suite. So there's a way you can go and set it up firstly. So depending on what you need to have configured, and like I mentioned before, you want to ensure that you utilize all the different Defender products, and they all kind of help in analyzing a threat or an attack on one of your systems. If I give you guys an example, because quite often looking at a common threat, the end user pretty much gets an email in their mailbox, right? So what happens is if the email protection system doesn't pick up that email as being a threat, the user is just going to be able to access that email and click on the link. So once that link is accessed and the endpoint does have protection or Defender for Endpoint running, it will be blocked and protected with the endpoint detection and response, which is the capability of investigating, detecting, and responding to those kind of advanced threats. And if you tie in Defender for Endpoint, Office, Office Defender, and Identity Defender, it will correlate all those different signals. So you'll get the information from the email and the information that Endpoint will provide. And if you have a look and go into the settings for setting up Defender for Endpoint, you can see that you have different features where you can go and specify connecting that into other Microsoft Defender products. So this is where I can connect it to my Defender for Identity if I have that, and also Office 365 Defender, Cloud App Security, and also things like your Microsoft Intune or Endpoint Manager. So those are some of the features that you want to have enabled so that you can actually correlate events. So once you have it all set up into tying in the different products, you will then have to onboard your different devices. So quite often devices might already be managed through Intune or Endpoint Manager or some other group policy or specific method. The Defender for Endpoint service allows you to onboard those different devices. So you can see which operating systems are supported. So right now I'm in onboarding, device management, selecting operating system, and currently you can see that it supports from Windows 7 and 8.1, 10 and 11, and all the different server versions from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2, Mac OS, Linux, iOS, and Android. So quite a lot of range. And depending on the operating system, so I'm just going to leave it with Windows 10. I can either select a deployment method. So the deployment method could be group policy or MDM, Intune if I'm using VDI, or a different configuration manager version. So depending on how I'm going to onboard my device or how I'm managing, I can get I can either download an onboarding package, but if I'm already running things like Intune and I've got it tied into my Defender for endpoint service, I can have the management and onboarding done through my Intune service by just setting up a configuration profile or enabling the EDR method in Endpoint. So once I've got that done, I can do a test and test my onboarding. And by looking at my devices, so I'm going to go into Defender device inventory. I'll get a list of all the devices that are onboarded. So I've got a test machine. It gives me a risk level and also an exposure level. So this machine is totally safe running Windows 10 and it's in a healthy active state. So when looking at the options of the power of Defender for endpoint service, I can look at the things like the vulnerability management. So for example, my exposure score will reflect based on risk. So depending on the software that I'm running, the application, and how I've configured security controls and also my applications running on the device, I can get a score. It will also give me security recommendations. So I can view the recommendations from the settings that I either have enabled or forgot to enable. And I can drill down into any specific setting and activate that. So there's a lot of recommendations. There's things like remediation I can apply. And a lot of different other specific systems and things that I can go and enable. So it will just give me a lot of information of where I can enable specific features. Like attack surface reduction is one of those, where I can secure my endpoint by shortening the attack surface. So what it means, basically, I can put security controls in place to prevent things like scripts running in Office documents, Word documents, or locking down my browser so that when a user goes to maybe a dodgy website, that it's immediately blocked and the user doesn't get affected by whatever threat is behind that website. So that's one of the things that ASR rules can go and protect. So common attacks, and depending on how you set this up with threat evaluation, it can go and make all the different common threats that's out there. I can see my health of my environment, and also any threats. So there's threat analytics built in that can give me an overview of live campaigns and threats happening out in the wild that Microsoft Threat Intelligence has picked up. So they basically investigate whatever threat is out there, and they generally release what's called a CVE with a number based on the threat. So common threats that's out in that are active in the wild, and I can see if there are specific threats affecting any assets that I have running in my organization, running Defender for Endpoint. So sometimes these are already protected because it being a cloud service. Let's say there's a new zero-day threat that gets discovered in Australia. By the time we wake up, Kazeem, we're already protected if we run in Defender, or we get a list and notification of the latest threat. And all we have to do is just follow the guidance because sometimes they can't automatically block. It might be a Windows or a flaw within a specific software, and all we have to do is just look at the analysis report that Microsoft provides and follow the guidance.
Okay.
So taking out a lot of guesswork.
Okay, thank you very much, Adnan. There's a question or two that I would like to ask, but unfortunately,
Sure.
we're running out of time. So I want to check for those who are interested in digging a little deeper, that they would like to learn just a little bit more about Endpoint. So are there resources you want to share, Adnan?
Sure. On docs.microsoft.com. Defender for Endpoint information, or people can either contact me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter at microspecialist, and I can direct them to where they can find more information. But like I said, from the docs, Microsoft.com, Defender for Endpoint, they can set up a trial, look at the deployment guidance, and see how they can learn and play around. Microsoft Learn also has great resources people can follow to learn how to apply Defender for Endpoint.
Okay. Thank you very much, Adnan, for your time.
No problem.
So here's where we're going to be calling it a wrap. Remember, you can have a rewatch of this episode and the previous episode on YouTube. There's the TED Talk on Wednesday, TED Talk with Kazeem on YouTube and across the other social media channels as well. So on that note, it's bye-bye from myself and Adnan, and let's continue to keep safe and let's do this again another time. So bye-bye now.
Bye-bye till next time.